important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Stay tuned to WOR for further development.
1941, Japan situation. America and other nations have imposed an oil embargo on Japan, which means Japan cannot continue their conquests. No problem. Japan would just get the oil it needs from the Dutch Indies. Their underfunded and undergunned fleet will pose no threat to the Imperial Japanese Navy. And if their ally, Great Britain, joins the conflict, well, Japan will fight them too. Both nations are too occupied with the European war anyways. So, through their new conquests, Japan's demand for resources shall be met. However, geography has cursed them. Look at what lays beside their vital supply lines. The Philippines, a U.S. territory. Although America is not officially allied with the British and the Dutch, they are on friendly terms. Japan cannot afford the risk of the U.S. entering the war while they are in the midst of their campaign. Their proximity to Japan's supply lines puts into jeopardy everything they are about to fight for. Basically, the Americans would be holding a dagger to Japan's throat the entire time they conduct their campaign, ready to commence hostilities at a moment's notice. Thus, they come to the conclusion that they must take out the Americans as well. This calls not only for an invasion of the Philippines, but also a preemptive strike on the powerful American fleet at Pearl Harbor. And so with that, history was set. Japan set its powerful Kido Butai to strike Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th. Now, the goal of the raise was as follows. 1. Sink a battleship. This was for propaganda purposes. Japan reasoned that if America saw their beloved battleships, symbols of their naval power, destroyed, their will to wage war against Japan would be shattered as well. 2. Immobilize the fleet for 6 months. The Japanese estimated that they needed 6 months to do all of their conquests. Then they would be on the defensive and await the American counterattacks and wear them down, culminating in a decisive naval clash. So note, the Japanese knew they could not win a long-term war with America, so Japanese strategy revolved on them waging a short-term war. This was why attacking the fuel tanks or naval facilities at Pearl Harbor was not even considered in the planning phase. It was irrelevant to the 6-month goal. At Pearl Harbor were some 80 ships. There were 8 battleships, 7 of them in battleship role and 1 in dry dock. 8 cruisers were at Pearl Harbor, 4 of which were accessible to torpedoes, and dozens of destroyers and auxiliaries were docked elsewhere. Unfortunately for the Japanese, the 3 American carriers were all at sea and not in port that fateful day. The attack on Pearl Harbor would be carried out by 6 fleet carriers and its strike force of 350 planes. Their crews had endured 10 months of training for this attack. In addition, 5 midget submarines would be tasked with penetrating the harbor and attacking in conjunction with the main airstrike. The attack would be composed of 2 waves. During the first wave, Lieutenant Fuchida commanded the strike against the ships in the harbor. The key to the first wave was the 50 level bombers and 40 torpedo bombers, also known as Kates. Their torpedoes had been modified with wooden fins so that they could be effective in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. Their priority targets were the battleships and carriers at port. The first wave of 183 aircraft was launched at 6 a.m. The strike force approached Oahu, and soon the formation separated into groups to attack their assigned airfields and targets. The sky was completely clear of American fighters. The Japanese had achieved complete surprise. The dive bombers beat the torpedo bombers to Pearl Harbor, the first bombs hitting the southern tip of Ford Island minutes before even the first torpedo had been launched. Planes from Hiru and Soryu approached at 7:55. They were disappointed to discover that their targets, the carriers, were not in port that day. Lieutenant Nagai, leader of Soryu's air group, realized there were no potential targets, so he and his wingman pulled off. However, the remaining 6 attacked. They probably mistook the old decommissioned battleship, the USS Utah, as a capital ship, and they fired upon her. 2 torpedoes slammed into her before 8 a.m. The rest missed. One missed so badly that the USS Raleigh was hit. The Utah capsized at 8:12. The Raleigh almost suffered a similar fate, but prompt damage control prevented her from capsizing. Nagai went around Ford Island and launched against what he believed was a battleship. In reality, it was just a cruiser, the USS Helena. She was double-berthed with an old mine layer, the Ogallala. Its silhouette probably gave the impression of a battleship. His torpedo actually went under Ogallala's heel and exploded into Helena's hull, damaging both ships. Nagai's wingman recognized that it was just a cruiser and decided to attack Battleship Row instead. The 8 Hiru planes didn't fare any better. Lieutenant Hirata and his wingman saw that there were no viable targets, so they headed for Battleship Row. However, the remaining 6 aircraft who were lagging behind got to see Nagai's attack on Helena and followed suit. 4 launched torpedoes, but they all missed terribly. The last pair aborted their run at the last minute and headed for the battleships. So now we have 4 Hiru and 1 Soryu plane maneuvering for Battleship Row, cutting right across the path of the other 24 torpedo bombers who are just coming in. In this photograph, you can see the opening stages of the attack. Both the Utah and Raleigh have been hit, and Utah is listing to port. At this moment, the torpedo runs against the battleships have begun. You can even spot 2 planes finishing their bomb runs. Due to the geography of Pearl Harbor, the torpedo bombers really just had one avenue of approach. If they had gone over the naval buildings, the turbulence would have thrown off their accuracy and limited their launch window. Therefore, the overwhelming majority of the Cape bombers flew single file down the southeast lock. The result was that instead of the attack being spread out, it would be disproportionately concentrated on the southern tip of Battleship Row, much to Oklahoma's and West Virginia's despair. 12 Akagi planes approached single file, 1,000 feet apart, starting at 7:57. All of Akagi's 12 planes launched against these 2 battleships, except one, which skillfully maneuvered and struck the California. The 4 Hiru planes from before joined shortly afterwards and launched against Oklahoma and West Virginia. Contrary to belief, the Japanese were not attacking with impunity. The defenders had taken advantage of the precious minutes warning afforded by the Fort Allen bomb blast, so that when the first torpedo planes of Akagi approached, many anti-aircraft gunners were already prepared. These vulnerable, slow-moving Kates had to make their torpedo runs under fire. 3 miles behind Akagi's strike was Kaga's air group. By now, the anti-aircraft fire was becoming more effective, and again, Oklahoma and West Virginia took the brunt of the attack. In the middle of their launch, that single Soryu plane from earlier swept in and got a hit on the California. However, one of Kaga's plane veered to the right because of this, but was able to hit the Nevada at 8:03. Kaga's air group was the only one to suffer losses. 5 of the last 7 attacking Kates were shot down. In this historic photograph, the torpedo attack is perfectly captured. You can see the torpedo hits on the Oklahoma, West Virginia, and the California. All of them are gushing out oil. In the background, you can see Hickam Field burning, and the Helena can be seen leaning against the Oglala. And a Japanese plane can also be spotted. However, the attack wasn't executed as smoothly as hoped. An attack that should have taken less than 90 seconds stretched out over 11 minutes from first run to last. Some had to abort and redo their runs due to mutual interference, and the heavy anti-aircraft fire threw off the pilot's aim and caused them to over-concentrate on just 2 battleships. 21 torpedoes were launched at Oklahoma and West Virginia, over half of the available torpedoes. Oklahoma had 12 torpedoes launched at her. 5 hit her, and she capsized in 15 minutes. West Virginia was hit by 7 torpedoes, but prompt counterflooding prevented her from capsizing, and she settled to the bottom. California should not have sunk from 2 torpedoes, but her hatches were open for inspection that morning, which contributed to her sinking. And she was abandoned due to fires, and when she was reboarded, it was too late. Of the 36 torpedoes launched, only 19 achieved hits. That's a 48% hit rate. 10,000 feet above came Fuchida and his high-level bombers. Their mission was to take out the inboard battleships inaccessible to torpedoes. They came in groups of 5. They released their salvos and scored an impressive 20% hit rate. Unfortunately for the Japanese, out of the 10 bomb hits, about 6 were low-order detonations or malfunctions. That is an outrageous 60% dud rate. The Japanese aviators were greatly let down by their weaponry. The damage could have been deadlier. However, the distribution was effective. California was missed, but 2 ineffective hits on Maryland were scored. Both West Virginia and the Tennessee were hit twice, and there were 2 additional collateral damage hits on the repair ship Vestal, moored outboard of the Arizona. Vestal suffered severe flooding and had to be beached afterwards. But all of these hits were overshadowed by the 2 hits on the USS Arizona. The first struck her aft on the quarterdeck, and another landed near her number 2 turret. It caused a magazine explosion, which exploded with a great force, and a tremendous fireball was seen. She split in half and sunk in the harbor, taking more than 1,000 sailors with her. Heavy fires burned for days. The explosion was actually caught on tape by Dr. Hackinson, who was on the hospital ship Solace. Nevada was the only battleship not suffering heavy damage and capable of getting underway. She did so at 8:40 with the intention of heading out of the channel. Now, one of the mini-subs actually did make it into the harbor. The other 4 were unsuccessful. At 8:36, the sea tender, the USS Curtis, spotted a sub. The submarine fired at Curtis but missed. In return, the submarine was hit by a 5-inch shell. The destroyer Monaghan, which happened to be getting underway at this moment, saw the sub and approached with the intent to ram her. The sub turned and fired its last torpedo, which missed the destroyer. At 8:40, the sub was rammed and depth charged. She sunk with both crew members killed. 167 planes formed the attack of the second wave, of which 78 were dive bombers allocated to go against warships. Much was expected from these skilled pilots. However, their performance was disappointing. First, take a moment to see what they were up against. By now, the anti-aircraft defenses were up and ready to greet the dive bombers. Couple this with the fact that there was a 70 to 90% low overcast, their accuracy was destined to be off. But most importantly, these pilots were guilty of poor target selection. This was their priority list. These dive bombers with their general-purpose bombs were well suited for attacking the 8 cruisers left in Pearl Harbor. But during the attack, about roughly 30 attacked battleships, only 17 went for cruisers, 16 attacked destroyers, and 12 attacked auxiliaries. The attack began at 8:54. The USS Nevada was caught in its escape during the second wave. The prospect of sinking the ship in the channel and thus blocking access to Pearl Harbor was a very, very improbable outcome. However, the pilots couldn't resist the opportunity, so they attacked from 2 directions. 14 to 18 valves dropped against Nevada. Nevada was hit 5 times by 9 o'clock. And at 9:10, she had to beach herself. This was the shining moment of the second wave. But it deserves to be criticized. Did they contribute to sinking a battleship? Yeah, but it was by the rarest of luck. Nevada succumbed not to Japanese bombs, but to poor material condition, critical design flaws, and a massively significant damage control mistake. And again, it still doesn't make it any wiser. The battleship should have been avoided. The attempt to sink Nevada in the channel was a waste of ordnance that could have been better employed against targets more vulnerable to their effects. 1 to 3 dive bombers went for California, scoring 1 hit. The USS Pennsylvania, the fleet's flagship, the only battleship in dock, was also poorly selected. 9 bombers went after her. She suffered only a single hit at 9:06. The real victims, though, were the 2 destroyers ahead of her, which received collateral damage. 2 hit the Cassin and 1 hit the Downs, heavily damaging both. So there could be a cultural explanation to why the Japanese pilots went for battleships. These young 20-year-old pilots were going into the most significant battle in Japan's history. No one wanted to go back home and report that they attacked a simple cruiser or a destroyer. No way.